Okay, welcome to the second office hour for the GDK team. Thanks for joining us, and then thanks for listening to the recording if you couldn't make it to our call live. So on the chat window, let me just copy the issue. And yeah, for some reason this issue was closed by somebody, so I assume that was a mistake, but I reopened it and then added some couple of additional points and the topics. For some of the one of the main things that we wanted to talk about, and Lee, I think you joined our call last month. One of the things we wanted to talk about was what do like GitLab engineers, for example, go through in terms of onboarding for GDK, and wanted to make sure that there's I mean, documentation was whatever is available to the GitLab engineers is also available to the wider community. And I was going through some documentation pages, and there's definitely some room for improvement. Not surprised. I mean, documentation always. I mean, it's sort of work in progress, but I checked the docs page and various like a README or .md files. So that's sort of one of the things I wanted to look at. And I mean, Ash, I think I posted this question internally to engineers about, how did you sort of get started, like using the GDK, and they gave me some pointers, and I can go through those. And I know, Lee, you had some like a feedback on not just like documentation, but support questions in general. Like we can quickly go through those. But I mean, Lee, was there anything specific that you also wanted to cover during the call, or?
I don't think so. I'm intrigued to see if we do a live install and more of a manual one. Whether that's more straightforward than the vagrant attempts that I've been making. The issue I seem to see is essentially the pace at which I understand GitLab is progressing. So, the Ruby version changing, the Postgres version changing, the gem versions changing, etc. And the fact that the vagrant image doesn't keep up. So, the most recent, it's completely broken at the moment because the version of, I don't know, 3 or 4 gems, I believe, is out of date. And the Windows VirtualBox Vagrant image is running on Ubuntu 16 with Postgres 9. And the current version of GitLab, I think, no longer supports Postgres 9. So unless I'm doing something radically wrong, it doesn't work at all. That added to my usual issues, which I see every time I try and install if I don't hack the script to disable the shares. I have to increase the disk space because 15 gig isn't enough when you're using the guest disk to install GitLab rather than the host disk, etc. So yeah, it's really, last time I was suggesting, maybe I'm the only one using the Windows VirtualBox Vagrant setup, and should I not be using that? Because should you guys stop attempting to maintain it, because it doesn't currently seem to be possible.
Okay. Should we just cover that really quick, and then we can jump to the other topic? So, in the issue, I'll try to attempt to take notes, but I mean, Lee and Ash, I mean, feel free to correct me like after the fact, or even as I'm taking notes. But
sure. Yeah, thanks again, Lee, and we really appreciate not only you joining the call, but also your input and the issues and the conversations we've been having around the challenges with running GDK under Vagrant, and Vagrant also on Windows. So again, just want to thank you for your effort so far. Yeah, so it's a great question around just to sort of pick one part of what you said around, is it something we support, and is it something that we should spend more energy on? So yeah, I mean, at this stage we don't have a really good understanding about the the numbers of exactly how people are using the GDK, how they're installing, what platforms, that sort of thing. So just for a bit of context, we are putting out a survey very soon to begin with. First just GitLab, and then we'll open up to a wider audience. That'll give us some bigger numbers and some more accurate numbers around how people are using. But obviously, we do have Vagrant, a Vagrant file and documentation around running Vagrant in the GDK. So yeah, I think at bare minimum we should look to maintain that at this stage, at least. Make sure it's accurate and up to date and works. And as far as into the future, as far as do we look to bring it on up to parity ongoing? I think that's another question. And with regards to running on Windows, in an ideal world, we'd love to be able to install the GDK as smoothly as possible on all platforms. That way everyone can contribute, and there's no sort of backward way you need to run something on your platform of choice just to be able to get in there and do what you need to do. So so I guess what I'm saying in a roundabout way is, yes, we need to put some effort in to get Vagrant working as it is right now, and that I think that covers what you suggested around making sure that the Ubuntu version kind of more closely matches like the platforms that we target with Omnibus, ensuring that the Postgres version matches the version that we're recommending. And with the GDK, we also try to stay on the sort of, I wouldn't say on the edge, more closely to the newer versions of things. So for example, like Postgres 12 is out, Postgres 11 as well, and we look to offer those as options. As far as that, by default we'll probably have Postgres 10 installed, but because it's a development kit, it should be possible without too much difficulty to be able to select 11 and 12, just to make sure that what you're doing is actually going to be sort of workable for the future. Yeah, so I think we definitely need to put some effort into Vagrant, and I apologize profusely that I haven't spent much time on the issue that we've been conversing on. I haven't been having much luck, to be honest, getting it to work on my machine, but it's something else. But the fact that I can't even get anywhere near closer to where you're sort of getting up to suggests that we have some work to do. So definitely, I'll commit to spending some more time on Vagrant. But just again, for some context, I started working full-time on GDK about 2 weeks ago, and prior to that, it was the maintainers sort of just doing what they can in between their other teamwork. So yeah, I'm working on it full-time now. We're currently getting a lot of things in order in terms of CI, updating documentation, making things a little more tidy before we start to launch into fixing things. And but yeah, so there's definitely a lot more happening, and we'll continue to improve. But yeah, definitely some work to do with Vagrant.
It's reassuring, at least, that you've had equal issues whilst trying to get it up and running.
Yeah, Ash, I mean, I just jotted down like 3 bullet points on the issue. I mean, if you don't mind like adding the existing issue that you just mentioned, that would be great. Let me paste it on the chat here so both of you know what I just typed in the issue for the office hour. Cool. All right. So, yeah, I forget. Like, it's been a while since I followed that MR on the survey. Like, do you know roughly when that's going to start to roll out, at least internally, Ash, or like?
It's a good question. I was hoping for last week,
okay.
but there was a suggestion to not use Google Forms, but instead use, I think it's called Qualtrics.
Qualtrics,
another platform.
Right.
I'm awaiting access, so I really want to get it out by this week.
Okay, cool. All right. So yeah, and happy to advertise it to the wider communities. So like post it on Gitter and even like a Twitter, for example. So like we want to have as many people sort of provide feedback. I think that would be very helpful for sure. So.
Yeah, appreciate that. So I think that the reason why we're not initially kind of sending out to everyone is, I think in the beginning I'd like to get just a bit of feedback on, is it actually asking the questions that we should be asking, and then just try and fine tune it a bit and then roll it out to everyone.
Cool. Okay. All right. So anything else on that, Lee, or just, I guess, for now, I guess just sort of stay tuned is sort of the message.
Yeah, no, I think that's nailed it. Again, as we mentioned last time, I think I'm open to doing it in a completely different way. If it's, oh well, actually I run a Linux VM with a GUI, so that I actually do my development inside the VM. Well, I already do my developments inside the VM because the host sharing of the files and folders doesn't work, which means I'm using a text editor to do all my development. But if instead it's like, well, I just do a native Ubuntu install with the GUI, and then I start to learn whatever the kind of development tools are within the Ubuntu GUI and use it a bit more natively, or a completely different approach, whatever it might be. I'm open to that. But because this option exists, the Windows VirtualBox Vagrant setup, I've sort of tried to use it, and it does, once I've got the hang of it, if I remember the steps, spinning up a new VM, I can do it within, say, an hour or two. And it is helpful because from time to time you do get it nuked, or the dependencies have changed, and it's easier to start from scratch than it is to try and fix up.
Yeah, and those issues around things changing and needing to be kind of nuked, that we see that quite often, even on the native side of things. So, for example, when on a lot of the GitLab engineers run Mac, and so when there's a Mac update, which is great, fixes security, upgrades libraries, and then you got a whole bunch of Ruby gems that have C extensions which suddenly stop working. So so it's something that's not immune to just even the native install, which is I would say right now the kind of preferred, or at least the most common way people are installing the GDK is by installing locally on the machines via Homebrew or the the package managers of those native platforms. But yeah, we've got a few things. I'll add it to the issue. We're looking at adding a sub command called pristine. So in the Ruby world, there's a pristine command for gem, which essentially reinstalls the gem, including any C extensions that it may have, and the pristine subcommand for GDK will attempt to do the same thing by returning your GDK to a pristine state, which will repair any broken things. So that's something that will help for when things get really gnarly. But
including possibly reseeding the database.
Exactly. Yep. As well as reseeding. Yep. I'll put those links in the issue.
Cool. That's awesome. Cool. All right, so let me share my screen if that's okay. We'll get started on a documentation discussion. Give me a second here. There you go. Hopefully people can see it.
Yep.
A few windows I'm sharing. So what I did was I went to docs.gitlab.com and just searched for GDK. And I mean, Ash, I don't know if you looked at like GDK like documentation files on the docs page recently. And as far as I can tell, that there doesn't seem to be a home for GDK as far as I can tell. I mean, I see like a links to GDK like here that's sprinkled around in various pages. And if you click this, you basically get sent to like a main README file. That's how it seems to work. So I'm wondering, like, would it make sense to even have a dedicated like a docs page under docs.gitlab.com? That's sort of the first thing that I thought of. But Ash, I don't know if that's something you thought about in terms of documentation, or if you've taken a look at this yet. But
I just happened to spot this yesterday when Patrick Dooley, who's the product manager for a few things, one including the GDK, and he had he went through and recorded him installing the GDK from scratch, and he came to this page.
Right.
And so yeah, this was so I think like ideally the bulk of the documentation should be on the GitLab development kits projects README, but there's nothing, I don't think there's anything wrong with having like a you know, a small little section here within the, the docs.gitlab.com with explaining, you know, what the options, because there's not just the GDK. For example, we do have the GCK, which is a very Docker-centric method. So I think maybe here, yeah, definitely have a little blurb about the options, what they, how they differ, and then where to find, you know, further sort of more specific help. Right.
And then once I got to the README file, I mean, which is one of the things I noticed was that it's let's see, I think this is the main page, and there are a lot of like sub pages that you need to get to. Like here is like a link to how to like actually use GDK. And then if you scroll down, it talks about how to prep your computer, I mean, which is important, and then actually like setting it up. What I thought was interesting when I talked to some of the engineers, like you know, that had joined GitLab relatively recently, was it seems like the important page was like the third one, setting up the GDK, versus like even I think like I think prepping wasn't that big of a deal, or even using or even like a how-to page. But this is sort of the page that they talked about being like pretty helpful. This is one of the first pages people mention. I mean, Lee, I don't know if you like regularly look at the page whenever you have problems with the GDK to see if there are any updates. But you know, I guess the point I'm getting to is from the navigation. I mean, I saw like especially from like I'm a pretty non-technical person. It was like sort of difficult to sort of navigate to figure out like a step-by-step like what needs to be done. So that was sort of my impression. But Lee, I don't know if you remember like, you know, looking this page for the first time, or if you know, revisit this frequently whenever you have any problems. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on this, but
that's interesting actually. I must admit I don't revisit it probably often enough. So it's possible that it does get changed and updated, and would help to prevent me hitting some of the obstacles that I do hit. Especially, for example, when there was the recent change to the way that you modify settings. So with the implementation, I think it's of the GDK.YAML. When that happened, I guess maybe that's sort of not an alarm bell, but a sort of suggestion that I might have. Well, should all contributors, developers somehow be on a newsletter or get some kind of notifications when something is updated, or something major changes? I know this is completely off topic, apologies, but when master's broken, for example, I think it was Stan Who, I believe, is that right? Responded to a couple of questions in the contributors channel, which was great, and sort of confirmed our suspicions that master was broken. But you know, do your internal engineers get notifications so that they don't start going crazy down rabbit holes trying to diagnose problems with their pipelines, with their builds, etc., when actually master's broken? So you know, we just need to be patient, wait for someone to fix master, rebase, and then continue.
It's a great point. It's not off topic, by the way. Well, I don't think so. Yeah, it is a challenge, and I mean, we do have the luxury at GitLab of having Slack available to all employees, and yeah, we do have a combination of channels. We have a dedicated GDK channel, and we do experience sort of both sides of things. Like, so when you say master's broken, generally what's sort of happening there is that like GitLab master is broken, but that's not to say that GDK master doesn't get broken. That does happen. So, and then because the GDK is made up of a number of sub-projects, one being GitLab, we've got Workhorse, Shell, Gitaly, etc. Any number of those can be, potentially non-functional and cause the overall like GitLab instance to not function as correct as it should. But going back to your point around, how do we communicate these things when, because we have status.gitlab.com for, for people who wishing to understand the production side of things, like when is the production GitLab.com suffering some sort of degradation or hiccup, but how do we communicate when the development side of things is currently, it's not possible for a developer to do their job. So it's an excellent question. I have raised an issue for it a little while back. I suggested at the time to potentially have pre and post sort of update messages when we're doing a GDK update, but that's not going to cover. I'll just paste it in the chat just so we follow along. But that doesn't cover kind of that's more, heads up, we've made a minor change, you may need to do something here or there, but for your sort of point around, there's a transient issue, we're actively working on it, how do we communicate that fact? So it's a great question. Newsletter, Google Group, Gitter, I think they're all, if we could have one way to create the message and have it sent to all those platforms, I'd be more than happy to maintain or manage that. So I think it's definitely something to.
I think one possibility, because I created a tunnel between our Slack and the Gitter contributor room, and I think I pinged you and Lucas on it. I think Ash on a question that came from Gitter. I mean that tunnel's there so that you don't have to necessarily leave Slack to just post a message. So for like a GDK, I don't think we need to do it for all like a minor updates, but any major updates on versions or major blocker that people are experiencing, if it can just post it even on like a Gitter channel, I think that would be helpful. Because I think Lee and like other active contributors are definitely there, and that's why you probably see me post questions on our GDK Slack channel anyway, whenever I see them. So I think that would be pretty effective. I mean, you can do it straight, just, straight on Gitter, or you can just utilize that channel that I created on Slack. So you can just post it there. They'll be broadcast over to Gitter. On like a GDK things, I think, we have a pretty small team. That might be a pretty easy way of doing it as a starter, and see if that works. And then, we can kind of calibrate like what needs to be broadcasted and what doesn't. But Lee and Ash, let me know if you guys disagree, or or you think that's a reasonable place to start. But
I think that sounds like a good starting point. I kind of wondered whether some of the integrated GDK commands, like the GDK update, might even be able to spit out something. But again, I guess it's somebody having to maintain that, and that's probably the challenge. But as Ash mentioned there, the kind of dependency chain that GDK depends on all of those products, Workhorse and GitLab itself and various other components. It's what's changed with those. The recent, what would you call it, dropping of support for Postgres 9.5. I would be interested. I don't think I can be bothered to do it quite now, but to see, was there a big announcement about that?
There would have been, or there was. I can't know the specific link, but in the release, so like the GitLab, like CE and EE releases, it would have been noted as a change in the, like a deprecation. So that does highlight a gap we have in, and this is one of many gaps we have between the version of GitLab that you're developing on versus the version of GitLab.com or the version of GitLab you may have on premises, that they are quite separate projects. So we do see that a lot of issues or a lot of merge requests being made in the GitLab code base and then kind of needing to be recreated in the GDK code base to fix documentation. So it is a bigger problem than, I guess, just say that the Postgres 9.5. It's and even another little minor thing like the name of the services don't match in the GDK version to say what's in Omnibus, which is the kind of production, most common production method for a deployment. So there's just this disparity that exists that we need to put some time and effort into, and I think it's a bit of a challenge to try and keep them in sync, but definitely I think starting with the advising of blocking issues like that, master is broken, there's an ongoing kind of issue with this code base, here are some steps, that will definitely, I feel, be a great start to unblock people, because that's the worst thing, blocking developers from doing what they need to do. So and that I am myself and others are looking into sort of further into the future, what will GDK look like? Will it actually exist, say, part of like the GitLab code base and not be a separate project because it's so sort of tightly coupled to the GitLab, the actual GitLab project, things like that. We need to start to think about how we can more closely bridge those gaps. But there definitely are gaps, and I'm sorry I don't have a more concrete answer, but definitely, I think anything we can do to spread any issues further than just the kind of Slack channels that we have at GitLab would be great.
No, I'm sure it'll be a team effort. I guess the other thing, maybe I should be a bit more disciplined raising issues. The Postgres issue that I had, and again, I think maybe this is what all the developers do, and maybe why we're in part of this situation, because I tried to do a GDK update. I got an issue with one of the database migration scripts that was trying to run, Googled that issue, found a Stack Overflow post that suggested that was because functionality that doesn't exist in Postgres 9.5, and then sort of I think I tried to spin up my new VM and that still had exactly the same problem. So I then thought, well, maybe it's because Ubuntu 16 is just so old. It doesn't, or that might have been to do with the Golang version not being on there, or whatever it might have been. And then I just kind of start plugging away until I get it working. And whilst I have been spamming that post, Ash, about trying to get GDK, working and kind of exactly the steps that are required, which hopefully will be helpful for someone, or we can use to try and dig out all of those individual issues. I wonder whether it would be, well, I know it would be a lot more beneficial if every time I hit a problem, I raised an issue, and even though I probably solve it, I then post the solution as well. I know that certainly if everyone else was doing that, it would be incredibly helpful for me. So I'm sure that the opposite is true, and each of those issues should probably then be looked at to say, right, okay, do we need to update the docs? Do we need to update the Vagrant file? Do we need to, whatever it might be, but having much more of a kind of catalog. So again, Slack's great for you guys, Git is great for us, but only while the information's kind of at the top. I think especially with the threads that appear now, it's going to be very hard to search. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, well, I think having the ability to, I would like to sit in the Gitter channel and be the Gitter. I'm not even sure of the correct terminology, channel, I suppose, and be more active. It's just a bit full on at the moment, trying to maintain, I guess, making progress on improving the GDK and also supporting the GDK channel that we have internally. So, but yeah, I think to begin with, having at least the ability to, even if it's manual, just to post the updates or use the tunnel that I must have skipped. Sorry, Ray, I
No
Didn't know
worries.
that existed.
I think I pinged you on the like a channel, but it's no biggie. If you go to that, if you go to Slack right now, look for Gitter contributor room, then you should be able to see messages that are coming across, and then the message you post there will get broadcast to Gitter as well.
Is
Cool.
is there a sort of big underlying reason why Slack can't be used by non-GitLab team members?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good question. I mean, this is something that I think especially in the community relations team that we talked about, we even thought about like having like two like instances, like one internal for GitLab and just a public instance that's open to like everybody, or like as long as you like sort of register, and then um, but we haven't. I think it's been a while since we had a discussion. So this sort of creating a bridge is sort of a like an interim solution for it. But um,
No, that seems good.
yeah.
And again, hopefully it's not too off topic, but
No,
my
it's
my,
not. Yeah.
well, my team have introduced me to Discord since we started remote working.
Right.
And again, you probably the last thing you want is yet another tool or service or system when you already have such
Yeah.
a vast host. But I'm not sure if the issue with DISCORD was, but the I wasn't sure whether the issue with Slack might be to do with kind of cost. I know when we looked at it, although there's the free version, there were some limitations that made us kind of consider whether we wanted to go for the pay for version. But with the remote working, we found that, yeah, it works using Zoom for calls or Skype and various other tools that we've got, but what I think they bill as passive voice chat feature of Discord is brilliant for kind of recreating our office environment, as we call it. So it's very easy for me to kind of just shout, and if anyone's around, they can respond or not, rather than me having to very deliberately ring them. But yeah, that tool seems to be working quite well for us, and it mimics Slack in a lot of ways, from what I understand. I don't know if either of you guys are familiar with it.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, because we have that like sort of embedded in our blog. Well, I mean, is that Discord or Discus? That's different, right?
Discord, sorry.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, sorry. I mean, the other tool that I just thought of, we have is like a forum.gitlab.com. And I mean, that's sort of an underutilized tool, but this allows, I mean, Lee, I don't know if you ever participated in our forums or been to our forum.gitlab.com. I mean, this is where it's more easily searchable, and then you can have more like sort of discussions, right? Rather than trying to deal with threads in like Slack or Gitter. I mean, we
I
can.
think I have
Yeah.
stumbled across it probably
Yeah.
when I've been searching again for solutions for error messages and that kind
Right.
of thing. But again, it seems to me, I guess maybe that it's laid out in a slightly nicer fashion, but it's again sometimes a negative almost of having too many tools. I assumed, I think I was getting the feeling that the forum might have been deprecated. It was actually legacy, and now that you use issues when you've got a question or you want to start a thread of discussion, you create an issue. So again, maybe that's something that doesn't exist or does exist and could be improved, or something that I've not seen that sort of really helps to highlight and say, hey guys, this is Gitter contributor channels, great if you want to try and get an immediate response, but often there may not be someone around. Issues can be used for this, the forum can be used for this, Slack's used internally for this, etc.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I wanted to like throw it out there. We actually, this is like a discourse based forum is something that we're trying to. I mean, we actually have people like starting to work on it again, so that it doesn't, so it gets revived. It gets revived, and expect us to sort of pick up. So it's another option. Um, but I mean, as a start, like, I mean, maybe, I mean, we just, we start with trying to see if, starting to use Gitter. I mean, it's a sort of a simple tool that we can use with the integration with Slack, and see how that works. And if it doesn't, then we can certainly explore other options. I mean, I wouldn't like necessarily rule other tools out. I mean, I'm not that familiar with Discord. I mean, Ash, I'm not sure if you are, but
Yeah, I think, as I say, it's something that you probably the last thing you want to do is introduce yet another tool. I
yeah.
think it was just fortunate in a way for us
Hmm.
at Ticket Enterprises, that is, that we weren't using. I suppose we've got Skype and Teams and
Hmm.
probably various other tools, but Microsoft Skype is notoriously flaky.
Hmm.
Um, Teams, I can't remember. We haven't really started to use, albeit that they've been trying to push people onto it. And I think we've got a couple of gamers on our team,
Hmm.
and they use Discord from a kind of gaming point of view, and they were the ones that recommended that. But
Hmm.
as I say, it is off topic because it's not specifically one of the issues we're facing here. But I've just found
Right.
that tool to work really well. I guess it is similar to Gitter in a way. It's that kind of
Mhm.
passive nature that if you've always got it open, every now and
Right.
then you flick back, and you might see something interesting on there.
Right. I mean, you bring up an interesting idea about like a newsletter. I mean, if you know, you know, it's probably. I mean, it's too bad like a Patrick's not on the call because it's late in the evening. But it's if that's something we were to do, I think. I mean, that could be published. I mean, we can publish the link on Gitter, for example, but that could sort of live in the forum, right? And then so that sort of facilitates the discussion, and then any Q&A that follows up, it's easier to search versus trying to do it on, because it would be a nightmare either on Gitter or Slack, right? Because it just, I think the discussion there is more, I mean, it's not like meant to be like a knowledge base by any means, but um,
I
yeah,
guess
yeah.
is there any highlight? Ash, I think you mentioned that the deprecation of Postgres 9.5 would have been included in release notes for the GitLab core product. I wonder if there's any way of flagging certain release notes in the change logs, or however you would do it, because what you really want is a culmination, something that what's the word I'm looking for? That yeah.
Condensed,
What was that? Sorry.
condensed, like a sort of more.
Not is absolutely, that's definitely condensed, but there's something I'm looking for that almost says, okay, let's take, you can flag, let's say, a change log as a major change or a dependency change or something like that, and then there would be something that collects all of those changes from Workhorse, from GitLab, from GDK, and sort of, yeah, somewhere where you can see a unified view of. It's just another idea. It doesn't immediately strike me as as brilliant, but I think it's, again, because I'm thinking, oh, I'm using GDK, I'm looking at GDK, I'm interested in GDK, but as you mentioned earlier, all the dependencies are all the core products, and if I'm not keeping on top of what's happening with all of those core products, then I'm potentially missing out on. But then again, there's a question, I guess, should I have to? Do I need to? Or as long as the kind of one or two people or a small team or whatever it is are aware of these things and therefore updating the GDK, vagrant images, etc., then does anyone else really need to be aware of all these things?
Yeah, they're all great points. Yeah, there's a lot there. Just something that just popped into my mind. So the general, I guess, structure of how GDK works is that GitLab, the project GitLab master, it drives the dependency structure. So when you do a GDK install or update, it pulls down master of GitLab, and then inside the master repository, there are a bunch of, I think there are files that tell GDK and as well as Omnibus, when those packages are created, which versions of Gitly, Shell, Workhorse to pull down. So that's the kind of driving point, and that's the way that GitLab needs to work. GitLab engineers, in that we all work out of master, and that's sort of hard coded into the way the current GDK works. But and that's kind of the source of where a lot of these incompatibilities and breakages around dependencies come in, because master moves so quickly. But for the usage pattern for or the workflow, I should say, for other people, such as yourself, you may not need to work out of master. It may be sufficient for you to be developing against the most current stable tag, and so therefore that would move far less quickly. And introduce far fewer dependency breakages, and would allow, I guess, more closely aligning the development against sort of production releases. Still, there's work to be done around communicating that a deprecation is coming in, and say 13, that needs to be reflected somewhere. When it comes time to do your GDK update, that they definitely need to be addressed, because there isn't anything right now. But do you, when you're making changes, and forgive me, I'm not sure of your sort of, when you do work on the GitLab code base, do you need to work out of master, just out of curiosity?
I think we probably do, because we do, within, I would say, a week, I can quite easily be 1,000 commits behind master. I don't think I'm exaggerating there. And quite often when I do merge or rebase, I do have to address conflicts, and all the reviewers, maintainers, whatever we want to call them, the guys that help me out with my MRs, do regularly kind of say, oh, can you rebase from master? So I think that it probably is quite important that to make sure that I'm not changing something that's already been changed, or doing anything along those lines. I think it could be a very good option if something's broken and I need to get up and running, to say, oh, is there a command that I can use to do a GDK update and tell it to use a certain branch or tag. That I think is a brilliant idea, just to kind of say, look, I really need to keep working, and can I do it that way? But for the kind of standard development cycle process, I think I probably do need to be on master.
So I mean, for example, Ash, like how frequently do you do GDK update, and what prompts you to actually do it?
Great question. So just to go back to the question I posed to Lee, when I was saying using master, sorry if I wasn't clear, that what I meant to say was GitLab master. So definitely at this stage, we don't have a concept in the GDK project. We don't have a concept of tags and releases of a GDK. That may come in the future, but definitely master is the only place right now that you can work out of in the GitLab development kit project. What I was meaning is the GitLab master branch of the main project is kind of what drives all the dependencies and updates. So when you do, and to lead into your question, Ray, around the reason why you would do a GDK update is, for one, most of the time it's because you're working on a feature and you need to keep up with all the active changes that are going on in GitLab master. It's not so much the GDK master, although there are changes that come in when you run a GDK update. The first thing it does is pull down the GDK master, and then from there that allows fixes and improvements around various things. And then the second thing it does is pull down GitLab master, and from there that's where it determines newer versions of gems and things like that. So if that flow, I hope that answered your question, Ray. if that flow, that's currently the kind of standard flow, and that's the flow that most engineers at GitLab kind of follow. But if the flow for, say, yourself, Lee, or others isn't necessarily required to use GitLab master, then that flow could be substantially kind of hardened by using the current stable, or at least saying, I want to develop against the bleeding edge, which is master, or the current stable, or the previous stable release, that kind of thing. That would protect from some of the kind of transient type of dependency breakages and that type of stuff that occurs from working directly out of master. That's a possibility.
Yeah, I still think that could be potentially a fallback option, but as a sort of standard, as a best practice, I think first of all, I hope that it would work better and be easier to support, and not easier all round if community contributors are following the same process and best practice as your engineers. And likewise, as I say, I think as soon as it comes a point of getting a maintainer or reviewer or someone to come and look, the immediate thing that they ask is that you rebase off of master. And yeah, the further behind you are, the more likely you are to run into conflicts, or sometimes you don't exactly have conflicts, but there's just things that there's been a little change there, and I can take advantage of that, or that may impact in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, it's definitely preferable to stay as close to master as possible, because you have all the reasons you've just mentioned. However, currently it sort of comes at the cost of potentially riding out the waves of breakages that we also as a company experience when master's broken. I think collectively it just requires this sort of ongoing effort to make sure our pipelines are have got the best coverage possible, and that we're continuing to review. But it will always happen. But I think the problems we're talking about here are not so much the transient type of problems with master. It's a fundamental change, like using the Postgres upgrade as an example. Like that is really not that well communicated, and then it leaves your GDK in a state where potentially blocked. So I think maybe park the sort of how GDK works in terms of keeping close to master, but definitely look to improve somehow, at least via communication, either through the Gitter and the forum, and also just try and keep on top of it.
I think looping back to the survey that you're talking about, and that's why I actually brought that up. I didn't know it was happening, but I suggested, or I actually asked on the last month's call about numbers of developers using Windows Vagrant VirtualBox. Obviously, the numbers for everything else would be really interesting too, but I tend to believe that I may be one of a few, which is why I sort of suggest, well, is it worth dropping support and stopping trying to maintain this? Because just for a select 2, 3, 4, 5 developers, it's requiring one full member of a team to actually maintain the Vagrant VirtualBox image, and that just doesn't kind of make sense. But if there are 20, 30, 100 people using the Windows Vagrant VirtualBox setup, then surely we must all be having similar issues and fixing them ourselves. We need to take the time to share those fixes, to raise merge requests in GDK. And I think maybe that's kind of another problem, that we're kind of in our little bubble and we're like, oh, I've seen this before, I know how to fix it, I'll fix it. For me, not, okay, well, this is a problem, let's raise an MR or an issue or whatever and actually get it resolved in GDK so that I and nobody else should see this issue in future.
Yeah, I think that's the something to aim for. But at the end of the day, you're paid to work on other things. So I guess finding the time, it's just a case of finding time, really, usually. So, but
True.
Anything you can add is very appreciative, very appreciated rather.
just one idea that I think, Lee, you brought up a few minutes ago, I mean, I think you use a term like a change log. Like in the README file, should there be a link to or a table of like, here's like the latest components that are part of the GDK, for example, whatever Postgres version and whatever, like, you know, here are the latest version that are supported. Like, would it make sense to sort of create a table like that, or like even like a point to a different, like a doc somewhere? Like, I don't know if
Well,
that's feasible.
that's
Yeah.
interesting actually,
Yeah.
because although it might not be exactly what you're referring to, but the preparing your computer for GDK is
Mm-hmm.
the one that actually I believe references. Yeah, so for example, that says that Golang 1.14 is
Okay.
required.
Yeah, you're right.
Postgres 11 is suggested, but I think it's saying that it still supports 10. So
Right.
if I could have, if I don't know that it's possible, but if I could subscribe to that page, um, which has been updated by the looks of it, I'm not going to take the time now to have a look at the history to see when it was
Right.
updated.
It was, I think there was an update like 2 days ago that, by the looks of it, but
So yeah, even that's interesting, because it's sort of like, well, surely alarm bells should ring somewhere when somebody changes anything on this page. They
mhm.
should have either previously, and again, and this isn't a blame game, as you said, Ash. It's everyone's paid to do their own different things. But if somebody's updating this document here and saying, well, Node.js 13 is required now, then presumably somebody then needs to go and look at GDK and actually, or Vagrant. Sorry, I forget that sometimes maybe I'm referring to specific. The GDK is 10 different routes to an end game, and I guess the Vagrant is one of those routes.
Yeah, and you've just mentioned a problem that we do have that I am, I don't know if I've created an issue for, but we don't have a good way to define, say, at a very basic level, you know, the version of Postgres is a really good example. You know, what is the version of Postgres that we want to actively kind of by default install and kind of work with, and then what are the versions that we, you know, have facility to be able to select between, and we don't have a good way to kind of have that cross-platform. So right now it's you know, baked in the Ruby code, and that's to, you know, to make that change effective in the Vagrant file, for example, you know, we'd need to make a separate change. So there is something, again, I don't know if I create an issue, but I'm abstracting all the versions of both the services and the software that the GDK requires into something that's centralized. And then I think I mentioned something like the GDK core, like having a core sort of a core part that can be utilized by both Vagrant and native. And then, you know, and just for heads up, in the future, we are going to start offering some of those data-oriented services like Postgres, Redis, MinIO, etc. We are going to offer those to run under Docker. So that takes a lot of the challenges around managing versions and compiling on platforms and things kind of out of the equation, and relies upon, you know, sort of leans upon, I guess, the Docker tagging system. But yeah, we definitely don't have a way to kind of connect all the dots between Vagrant and other ways to do things. So that will improve. But yeah, it's a bit of a, and at the moment, the focus is on the GDK native side of things but yeah, I will commit to improving the Vagrant stuff. So at least, you know, matches right now with, you know, with what we're saying as far as versions and things. So.
Yeah, we're a few minutes over, but I mean, on the doc side of things, I think what I'll do, if you don't mind, I might just open an MR, like even on the main README page, suggest some improvements that I mean that we sort of discussed here in the last 15 minutes or so. And then, I mean, Lee, I think you raised a couple of good questions about, you know, how will like updates on important things be communicated. I think that's definitely worth looking into. Yeah, and then yeah, I didn't even think about this when master is broken. I mean, this obviously doesn't get communicated to, like, I mean, there's a Twitter handle for status, but maybe we need to figure out a way to sort of communicate that somehow, because it obviously, because I mean, I've noticed that too over the past couple of days. There's something flaky about master, and then your pipeline fails with, you know, and it wasn't due to any changes that people have been making from the wider community, right? So I think that's something like worth looking into, but
Yeah, we
yeah,
could have a
Cool.
like a Twitter GitLab dev
yeah,
account that is just
right,
posts when there's a broken master.
right, right. Yeah, that's yeah. I wonder if there's an even way to sort of automate that, because I mean, we've sort of figured it out on the Slack channel, and like, can we just like pipe it into like a
Although I
yeah,
might be
yeah,
reinventing the wheel actually, because come to think of it, when Stan shared the link, I suspect, is there a label?
I don't know if there's a
I
label.
think it was something to do with, oh God,
There's master dash broken. You can subscribe to on the GitLab -org group. There is a master dash broken
so this one was
label.
master needs investigation. I'm not quite sure.
Okay.
So when you say you said you could subscribe. How do you do that then?
I shall get you the link. Yeah, so the master broken, I'm not familiar with the master needs investigation, but typically when master is detected as being broken, that obviously impacts everyone. So an issue is created with that tag, and the tag then, I think that is, there's some sort of automation around that being then, any issues that are created with that tag then get posted back into Slack. I think it's the development channel, but I'll just find the.
Okay. Because that's similar to what I was saying about the README for the kind of dependencies. I'm not aware of any real kind of notifications or what do you call it? Yeah, subscriptions that you can do within the GitLab product itself to sort of say, oh, let me know if an issue gets raised with this tag, or let me know if this file gets changed, or.
Yeah, not down to the file level, unfortunately. There's RSS feeds for projects, but they will be very noisy.
It looks like there is an RSS link. Yeah, there is actually at the top of issues once you've applied filters. I've never, RSS I remember as being, again, some kind of, I'm going to call it legacy thing that you used to use RSS readers. And I mean, is that still a thing? Do people still?
Yeah, I do, but I'm pretty old, so.
I mean, like, so what, you have a tool, is there a tool that you use that then just sits in your tray or something and listens and notifies, or?
Yeah, I mean, Firefox has native support for RSS, and I think.
Would that be easier than just subscribing to a label like Lee was suggesting? But
I think the label's much more precise. That's the benefit there. You can really fine tune. The RSS is just a bit of a fire hose.
Yeah.
There is an option to subscribe to the label using RSS.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you can find that, then you're pretty close to it's master colon.
So I just kind of found the issue that Stan posted in the
yeah, I'm going to paste the label here too, so you can find it, Lee.
Yeah, it's master colon broken, and then because it has multiple states, you can have broken needs investigation. But
okay, yes. Yeah, sorry, that is so that is slightly different to what I was looking at. So I get an email with that rather than the RSS, would I, every time an issue was raised, or?
Yep.
Yeah, actually, I might actually do this because I haven't thought of this before, but yeah.
Is this, I'm not sure if I've pasted the right one. I think I'll paste it in, but I think it's the same as the one.
Oh, you have the master broken one.
Yeah, and then you can subscribe at a group level, which means at the one I sent through, was for your GitLab-org, which is probably not what you want, because that you'll get master broken issues being created for multiple products. So maybe
I've done likewise. I've subscribed on Master Broken and Master Needs Investigation for GitLab. The GitLab project specifically, not just the group. And I'll be interested to see if I wake up to 100 emails.
Hopefully
it's honestly,
not.
I mean, probably one a day, and that would be the most I think we should be looking at, because that's anything more than that's going to be impacting a lot of people. Yeah, I subscribe to, and I usually see about one a day. So
cool.
All right. Well, thanks for getting up early, Lee, and staying extra time. Let me hit the stop the record button, and then we'll schedule another one next month.
Great stuff.
Cool. All right.
Awesome.
Thanks very much, everybody.